They say reality is stranger than fiction, but sometimes it's far more terrifying. The following stories are not urban legends. They're not creepypasta. These are accounts based on real events, told by the people who lived through them and survived barely. Tonight, we'll explore 3 disturbing true horror stories, each one a chilling reminder that the monsters we fear might be standing right beside us. From a mysterious visitor who appears at night, to a sinister figure haunting the open road, to a phone call that defies all logic. These tales will make you question what's real and what's lurking in the shadows. Make sure you stay until the very end, because the last story is the one that still haunts my dreams. Story 1. The Night Visitor. It was the summer of 2014 in a small rural town in Montana. Sarah, a 27-year-old nurse, lived alone in a small one-story house at the edge of town. The nearest neighbor was almost a mile away, and the only sound at night was the wind pushing through the endless fields of wheat. She worked late shifts at the local hospital, so it wasn't unusual for her to get home around 2 or 3 in the morning. That night was no different, or so she thought. She pulled into her driveway under a moonless sky. The darkness felt heavier than usual, almost pressing against the glass of her car windows. The air was unnaturally still, and the usual chorus of crickets was absent. Inside, she kicked off her shoes, made a cup of tea, and sat in the living room scrolling through her phone. That's when she heard it, a soft, deliberate knock at her front door. Not loud, not urgent, just 3 slow knocks. Knock, knock, knock. Sarah froze. It was nearly 3:30 a.m. Who would be knocking at her door at that hour? She thought maybe it was a neighbor in trouble, but the idea of opening the door to a stranger in the middle of the night made her uneasy. She moved quietly to the window next to the door and peered outside, but the porch light had burned out earlier that week, and the darkness beyond her glass was impenetrable. Again, the knocks came, this time slower. Knock. Silence. Knock. Silence. Knock. Something about the rhythm felt wrong, almost intentional, like whoever it was wanted her to feel their presence, wanted her to know they weren't in a hurry. Sarah called out, "Who's there?" No answer. She grabbed her phone, but before she could dial, she heard something, a sound that made her skin crawl. It was breathing, slow, deep, and steady, right on the other side of the door. She backed away, her hands shaking, and dialed 911. The operator told her to stay on the line and not approach the door. But then, she heard a faint scratching at the wood, like fingernails dragging down it, deliberate and slow. The scratching stopped. Silence. Thinking maybe the intruder had left, Sarah crept to the back window to look outside. That's when her heart dropped. Under the pale light of the moon, she saw a tall figure standing in her backyard, facing the house, perfectly still. The figure didn't move, didn't tilt its head, just stood there. Moments later, she heard footsteps circling the house, slow and heavy, crunching over the gravel. When they reached the front, the knocking returned, but louder now. Knock, knock, knock. The police arrived 12 minutes later. They searched the property, but found nothing. No footprints, no tire tracks, no signs of forced entry. Sarah replaced all her locks and installed motion sensor lights the next day. But here's the part that still keeps her awake at night. 2 days later, she found something etched into the wood of her front door in thin, shallow lines, almost like it was carved with a fingernail. It read, "I know you're awake." Story 2. The Man in the Rearview Mirror. It was a cold November night in 1998. David, a 32-year-old truck driver, was making his usual overnight delivery run through the remote highways of northern Arizona. The route was long, dark, and mostly empty, just miles and miles of desert stretching in every direction. The road was silent except for the hum of his engine and the occasional hiss of wind rattling against the cab. He'd done this drive dozens of times before, but this trip would be different. Around 1:45 a.m., David stopped at a small roadside diner to grab a coffee and stretch his legs. The parking lot was nearly empty, except for a single old blue sedan parked near the edge. He didn't think much of it at the time. Inside, the diner was quiet. A single waitress served him coffee and pie while an old jukebox played faintly in the background. As he got up to leave, he noticed something strange. Through the diner's glass door, he saw the blue sedan again. But this time, it was parked right next to his truck. David got in his truck and started the engine. He checked his mirrors out of habit and froze. In the glow of his rearview mirror, he saw a man sitting in the driver's seat of the blue sedan, staring directly at him. No expression, no movement, just staring. David pulled out of the lot and back onto the highway, trying to shake it off. But minutes later, he glanced in his side mirror and saw the blue sedan's headlights trailing him in the distance. At first, he thought it was a coincidence. But the car stayed with him mile after mile, curve after curve, always the same distance behind. David decided to test it. He slowed down. The car slowed down. He sped up. The car sped up. It wasn't passing him, and it wasn't falling back, just maintaining that same haunting distance. The desert highway was empty. No gas stations, no towns, no exits for miles. Only the black void of night ahead and behind him. David gripped the wheel tighter. His gut told him something was very, very wrong. After nearly 30 minutes of this silent pursuit, the blue sedan suddenly sped up, closing the distance. David's heart pounded. He reached for the CB radio to call for help, but before he could speak, the sedan swerved violently into the opposite lane, pulling up alongside his truck. The driver's window rolled down. In the faint glow of the dashboard, David saw him clearly. A pale-faced man, thin, with deep-set eyes that didn't seem to blink. His mouth hung slightly open, like he was trying to speak, but no sound came out. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the sedan dropped back behind him only to turn off its headlights. David's truck was now surrounded by darkness, except for the faint outline of the sedan barely visible in the mirror, still following. Finally, an exit sign appeared up ahead. David took it without thinking, pulling into a brightly lit gas station. He parked near the entrance, ready to run inside. But when he looked back at the road, the blue sedan was gone. He waited for nearly 20 minutes, scanning every passing vehicle, but he never saw it again. A week later, David mentioned the incident to another trucker at the depot. The man's face went pale. He said he'd heard about that exact blue sedan before. Several drivers had reported being followed by it late at night on that same stretch of highway. The strange part? According to local police records, a man driving a blue sedan had died in a head-on collision on that very road 10 years earlier, to the day. Story 3. The phone call that shouldn't exist. It was a rainy night in March of 2007. Emily, a 25-year-old university student, was studying alone in her small apartment in Portland, Oregon. She lived on the third floor of an old brick building, the kind with thin walls and creaky wooden floors. The wind howled outside, rain lashed against the windows, and the only light in the room came from the warm glow of her desk lamp. She was halfway through an essay when her phone rang. She glanced at the screen. It was a number she didn't recognize. For some reason, the area code caught her attention. It was from her hometown, a place she hadn't visited in years. She hesitated, but curiosity won, and she answered. "Hello," she said. What she heard on the other end wasn't static. It wasn't silence. It was breathing. Slow, uneven, almost like someone was struggling to catch their breath. Emily repeated, "Hello? Who is this?" The breathing continued for several seconds. Then, a faint whisper. "Emily." Her blood ran cold. The voice was weak, trembling, but familiar, painfully familiar. It sounded like her mother, but that was impossible. Emily's mother had died in a car accident 6 months earlier. Emily's hands began to shake. "Who is this? This isn't funny." The voice whispered again, this time more urgently. "Don't let him in." Emily's eyes darted around the room, panic setting in. "Don't let who in?" she demanded. But the line went dead. Heart racing, she called the number back, but it rang once and then went to a generic, disconnected tone. She sat frozen at her desk, every creak in the apartment suddenly magnified. That's when she heard it, a knock at her door. It wasn't a polite knock. It was sharp, loud, and deliberate. 3 times. Bang, bang, bang. Emily's chest tightened. She didn't move, didn't make a sound. The knocking came again, followed by a deep male voice calling her name. "Emily, I know you're in there." Her phone slipped from her hand as she backed into the corner of the room. Whoever was at the door jiggled the handle, then pounded harder. She dialed 911 with trembling fingers, whispering her address into the phone. The dispatcher told her to stay put, that officers were on their way. After what felt like an eternity, the pounding stopped. Silence filled the apartment, except for the sound of her own breathing. When the police arrived, they found no one in the hallway, No footprints, no sign of forced entry. But here's where it gets stranger. The call log on her phone still showed the incoming call from her mother's number. When the police traced it, they confirmed it was indeed her late mother's old landline, the one that had been disconnected since the day she died. Emily moved out of that apartment within a week. She never got another call from that number, but to this day, she refuses to answer calls from unknown numbers, especially on stormy nights. And sometimes, when she's alone and the wind is howling, she swears she can still hear her mother's voice whispering her name. What makes these stories so disturbing isn't just the fear of the unknown. It's the fact that they all brush against something we do know, our own reality. In The Night Visitor, we're reminded that danger doesn't always come crashing through the door. Sometimes, it just stands there, patient, waiting for you to make the first move. Each of these tales plays on something deeper than jump scares. They tap into the uncomfortable truth that the world is far less safe, far less predictable, and far less logical than we like to believe. Because whether it's a stranger in the dark, a shadow in your mirror, or a voice from beyond the grave, sometimes the most frightening thing is knowing it could happen to you. Don't forget to like this video to help others find it, and subscribe with the bell on, because next time, we'll dive into stories even darker than these.